Hello, my name is Dario Romero, and I'm here with a very special guest.
Daria, thanks for having me. My name's Jeff Kerr. I'm a criminal defense attorney with the law offices of Brandon White.
And today, with two firms are joining forces to talk about a very important topic, which is lawful detentions when it comes to police officers, troopers, or even ICE officers. So, Jeff, can you tell us what is a lawful stop by an officer?
Well, before an officer can detain you, before they can stop you from going about your day and kind of force you to submit to a criminal investigation or an investigation of any sort, there has to be what's known as reasonable suspicion. And sometimes that's easy. Somebody's speeding, somebody fails to signal a turn, and sometimes it can be a little more subtle. Somebody wearing a heavy jacket in an alley in the middle of the night, peering into the windows of a closed business, something like that.
Okay, so let's assume there is a lawful stop, that an officer stops a person for a reasonable suspicion. Can that ever become an illegal stop or illegal seizure?
Yes, a lawful stop or a lawful seizure can't go on forever. It can only be as long as is necessary for the officer to investigate the suspected violation they're looking into.
So let me ask you this. So let's assume that someone was speeding and they get pulled over for speeding. What can be reasonable in terms of time frame for that stop to be?
Typically, the courts are putting the time limit on those at around 20 minutes, give or take. It's not a to the second thing, and there can be certain circumstances that allow for a longer or shorter period. But as kind of a rule of thumb, 20 minutes for a regular traffic stop is usually acceptable.
Okay. And as a driver, do they have any specific rights that they have to do, or can they choose not to do certain things during a lawful stop?
Well, the driver is going to be obligated to yield to the police officer. When the red and blue lights come on, you have to pull over and you have to make contact with the officer, provide identification, license, registration, proof of insurance. The officer can also control the driver's actions, either order them to step out of the car or order them to remain in the car. And if the officer asks if you're carrying any weapons, you're obligated to answer that question.
Okay.
Beyond that, though, generally you're not required to answer questions about your activities. You can invoke your right to remain silent, decline to answer an officer's questions. Generally, you don't have to allow an officer to search your vehicle, although sometimes they can do a limited scope search to see if there's any weapons just for their safety during the stop.
Okay, and let's assume the driver of the vehicle has any passengers. Do passengers have any different rights than the driver?
Yes, the passenger's kind of stuck there on the traffic stop. The officer can control their movements as well, order them to step out of the vehicle, order them to remain in. However, unless the passenger commits a separate violation, the officer walks up and the passenger's not wearing a seatbelt, or the officer sees some sort of contraband in the passenger's area or on their person, at that point they can compel the passenger to become part of the investigation or start a new investigation into the passenger. But beyond that, the passenger isn't obligated to provide identification, answer questions, or anything like that.
Okay. And so let's assume that because of an illegal seizure or detention, there was, let's say, illegal substance or some type of testimony obtained. What can they do about that violation?
Well, the first thing, out on the scene, there's not a lot you can do. You're going to want to comply with the officer's commands, even if you believe those commands are unlawful. Later, you're going to want to get with an experienced criminal defense attorney who can work on submitting a motion to suppress evidence and arguing to the judge that there was a constitutional violation, an unlawful detention, an illegal search, and work on getting that evidence suppressed so that the prosecution cannot use it at a trial.
Okay. And in terms of immigration proceedings, there are certain people that are here under a lawful permanent residency that have deferred action, which is called DACA or Dreamers, or just do not have any status whatsoever. And it's very important that they know their rights, because many think that because an officer is asking questions that they have to answer all the questions. And what I do in immigration court is that if there was an illegal seizure, and based on that illegal seizure, ICE or the Department of Homeland Security was able to obtain what country that person is from, then they can end up in deportation proceedings or removal proceedings. So it's very important for them to know, or for you to know, what you can say, what you cannot, and you can ask questions if you are detained. You can say, "Am I free to go, or am I being detained?" And as Jeff said, you can say just maintain quiet. You can use your right to remain silent. Another thing that's important, for example, looking at a criminal case versus an immigration case. Let's say there was a violation of your rights in the criminal case, and because of that violation, there was, let's say, drugs. You need to take care of that in the immigration and the criminal stage, and you can't do it later in the immigration. So, for example, if you didn't do so in the criminal case and you get convicted, you don't get a second bite at the apple at the immigration stage, because that doesn't matter.
Now, when you've got clients who have kind of these parallel criminal immigration cases, when do you like to get involved?
I like to get involved since the beginning. That way I can foresee any issues if there are any. I've worked with Jeff in the past about talking about different cases before submitting any pleas or signing any pleas, whether or not they might have immigration consequences. And immigration law is very complex, and sometimes we know for sure whether if there are going to be immigration consequences. Sometimes we're not sure, and that's because immigration law changes on a daily, weekly, even monthly basis.
And it's really helpful with someone like Dario to get involved in our case so that we can know what we're trying to negotiate for and what's going to be the best outcome for our clients, and making sure that we don't wander into a trap as to, you know, something that's going to hurt you in the later proceeding.
And that's a great point, because sometimes I recommend a harsher punishment or conviction, even though it's worse for criminal side, but it's better for the immigration side. So sometimes it's it conflicts a little bit, but my job is to make sure people's rights are protected in immigration proceedings. His rights to make sure they're protected in the criminal context.
And knowing that kind of the full circumstances on something is really helpful, where we can prioritize, you know, are you more concerned about the criminal consequences? Are you more concerned about the immigration consequences? Will you take a harsher plea here to avoid worse consequences down the road? That's something that's really helpful for kind of our whole client approach in trying to get you the best outcome that we can.
And do you have any tips for people who are detained and what they can do to avoid any difficult circumstances?
Yeah, first and foremost, we're talking about safety issues from the get-go. Be polite and professional, obey all of the officer's commands. You know, don't turn this into something worse than it is. You're not obligated to answer an officer's question, and you can invoke your right to remain silent, request to speak to an attorney. And usually I recommend that in any sort of investigation context. However, while you have a right to remain silent, you cannot lie to a police officer, and lying to a police officer can actually get you additional criminal charges, and I'm sure you can answer more on this thing, the kind of charges that could have immigration consequences due to the dishonesty aspect.
Yeah, there's anything that's related to fraud. When it comes to context of additional charges, crimes, it can affect, for example, if someone's fighting for an immigration bond, all those charges will come into the file, even though they were not convicted for them. The judge can still consider them. So that's very important, not to add on to any additional charges you may or may not have.
Yeah. And then finally, you do have a right to record contacts with the police. Oftentimes the police are recording you through body camera or dash cam video or that sort of thing, but you're allowed to record them back. And it could be helpful down the road when we're talking about one person says, the other person says, and the judge is making a decision, to have that independent recording so that people can hear exactly what was said and exactly what happened out there.
Okay. And if you have any questions regarding criminal, traffic, immigration, personal injury, our information is on the screen. My office is located in Tempe. Where are you guys located?
We're down in Central Phoenix, right off of the 51.
Okay, and if you have any questions, give us a call. Our numbers are on the screen. And thank you guys for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Dario. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for coming. Thank you.